Welcome to Safety's Frontline. People are our purpose because it's people that deliver safety through the important work that they do every single day. Whether you're a passenger, a pilot, an engineer, a designer, a safety leader, or an investor, you have an important part to play in keeping us safe. And the collaborative work that we do at Heli Offshore is aimed at making sure you have the right tools, the right training, the right techniques, and the right technology. And we want to make sure you have everything you need so that we can fulfill our joint commitment that no lives are lost through offshore helicopter flight and that people come home safe every single day. Thanks to everyone that contributes to our collaborative work on safety in the offshore helicopter industry. We know we're facing very challenging times with the global pandemic and very difficult market conditions. However, despite all this, we'll continue to focus our resolve and our resources on those safety actions that make a real difference in the front line where it counts.
Good morning and a very warm welcome to members of IOGP and Heli Offshore. It's a real privilege to gather together this morning, and the opening credits remind us of why we're here. The men and the women, the maintainers, designers, pilots and passengers on the front line of offshore aviation. So they're the point of our efforts and the point of this call. And we all together share a mission to ensure no lives are lost in offshore aviation. And we're here due to unprecedented collaboration. IOGP 690 limits its scope to offshore commercial helicopter operations and is all the stronger for its alignment with other industry initiatives, with Heli Offshore's safety performance model and recommended practices, with work by Flight Safety Foundation, ICAO, HSAC, Oil and Gas UK, APITO, manufacturers, and many other industry bodies. Now, the intention of 690 is to recognise best practice where it exists and make sure it's hardwired into industry contracting standards. And in the next few minutes, we'll hear from Tony Cramp, Chairman of the IOGP Aviation Subcommittee, with a short presentation about the 690's ambition, how it was developed, what's changed, and most importantly, how we're going to implement it. After Tony's presentation, there'll be plenty of time for comment and discussion, and we'll close this session within the next hour and a half. If I could first outline a couple of practicalities. We're recording this call for those that can't join us, and a big thank you to those that have submitted your questions already. If you haven't, no problem, keep a pen and paper handy to note down your questions during the session. You're currently all on mute, so please share your questions and comments via the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Please don't use the other icons. Instead, the Q&A icon will take you straight through to the Heli Offshore team who are waiting to hear from you. Every question will be answered in turn by Heli Offshore's CEO Tim Rolfe and IOGP's Tony Cramp, who will then draw on our panel. Just going to introduce our panel. We have with us this morning Francois Lassalle from Heli Offshore, Grant Campbell from the 690 Work Group, Alan Coombe from ASC Leadership Team, Olav Skar and Øyvind Solberg. If we don't get to your question this morning, rest assured that this is just the first of a series of these sessions and consultations. We will gather together the questions that we haven't answered in a report that we'll distribute in the next week or so. I'd now like to hand over to Tony to start proceedings.
Okay, thank you very much, Louise. Real pleasure to be here this afternoon. Thank you to Heli Offshore for hosting this event, and thanks to all of you for joining us here this afternoon. Good morning to everyone over on the western side, and good afternoon to everyone who's joining from Europe as well. 690 has been a very long journey. We've been talking about it for quite some time, and there's been a huge amount of work gone in from a lot of people to get us to a point that we're at the moment where we're on the verge of getting this published. And today's engagement really is to talk to you as our primary stakeholder group and those that have contributed ahead of that publication so we can have this discussion. I do want to thank at this stage the work group themselves, so led by Jonathan Phillips, Grant, who's on the call today to represent the work group, Steve Hawkes, Mike Simmons, Terry Dupree, John Hopkinson from Heli Offshore, and Cameron Ross. And those guys put in a huge amount of time over the last couple of years to get this landed. The job we've all got now is to get it implemented out there and being useful. What I'm trying to do today is really cover and give you an indication of why we've done 690, what was the purpose behind it. Just briefly go over what we've done in there, what are some of the major changes, and then talk, as Louise mentioned there, about how it's going to be implemented and how we're going to realise the value from 690 itself. It's an opportunity for you to hear from us, from myself, Tim, the other panelists, and the work group. Primarily, though, it's an opportunity for you to answer questions, and thanks to those of you that have put them in previously, but also, as Louise mentioned there, you've got the opportunity to add questions as we go through this if anything's not clear. What I'm also keen for, and we may not get to that during the call today, but please feel free to add in information afterwards, is your opinion on the challenges and or thoughts on the challenges we have for implementation going forward, because you are all going to be part of that implementation journey. So we'll move on to the first slide, please, Noah. Okay, so 690, as I mentioned, it's the IOGP report. Aviation has been one of the primary focus areas for IOGP for some time now, in terms of eradicating fatalities across the oil and gas industry. Alongside process safety, land transport, aviation has been one of the areas where there have been more fatalities, or too many fatalities within that area. And so it's a major focus area, and out of that has come the need to readdress the standards. If we look at the history of that, next one please, Madam, then the performance and the level of conformance with the old IGP standard was far too variable. It was not reflecting current industry practice. The bar was set relatively low, and many of us had moved on well beyond that. And what that resulted in is a lot of unnecessary variance in requirements, both from a contracted side and a lot of variance in the way in which standards were being applied. So there was a need for a common industry language in terms of the standards, the specifications, and the practices. We've also got significant overlap already. We've all been part of Heli Offshore for quite some time, and with other industry groups, be it HSAC, Oil and Gas UK, all the others there, we're all looking at similar safety strategies. We've all identified some similar priorities to go after. And this was a good opportunity then to gain further alignment. And as I mentioned there, those opportunities have already been identified. What we need to do is articulate it and then get behind a single way of addressing many of those focus areas. So the background was that we wanted a recommended set of practices in contractable form. We haven't had that before. There are many smaller oil and gas companies out there that don't necessarily want to be writing their own standards. And so having the IOGP guidance in a format that can be picked up and referenced in contracts was felt to be a big benefit. We're looking to those best practices that reflect the collaboration that we already have. The bottom line, though, what we've tried to do is get our 690 to represent what we need, what we believe needs to be in place for us to achieve that shared vision that we have both across Heli Offshore, amongst all the operators, amongst all the customers, of getting to that zero fatality goal. And this is what we believe we've defined within that. Just going into some of the background of how we've done that then. So this is the breakdown of the work group and the individuals that I mentioned a minute ago. The scope, it is limited at the moment to offshore commercial air transport. Going forward, we'll be developing further guidelines from the ASC, which will cover our other areas of exposure. But 690 itself is very much focused on offshore commercial air transport. And really, again, reflecting what Louise mentioned there, the two aims of this are to raise the bar on safety, but in doing so, to reflect the industry best practice that is already out there. There's very little in here that's new or looking into the future, but what we are trying to do is reflect and therefore reward, in a sense, those that are already carrying out those best practices, and to influence and reward people for continuing with that and raising the bar. In terms of the inputs, you can see there, the old 590 was obviously the baseline, together with a report which was R410. That was the old contractable version of the IOGP standard. And then we've also taken elements and aligned with elements of bars, and a large focus on the heli offshore safety performance model, which has given us a very good framework, and again, a commonality of risk picture that we've used to develop the document. And you can see there's still basis in the regulatory documents and aligned also with some of the other leading IOGP documents. The final structure, the one main point I'd highlight here is that it's designed to be mapped against that heli offshore SPM. And the reason for that is that it will create this alignment. It means we are talking the same language. It means we're talking about the same risks, priorities, and focus areas. And so with limited resources, we can focus where we all believe and where we've all identified we're going to get the most bang for our buck moving forward. Final one on the document itself, we're looking to use performance goals in there. So basically to explain what we're trying to achieve with the requirements in each section. And it also uses a language that isn't the old shall, must, should, which causes confusion, but it's talking in terms of what is in place and assuming it in the present tense, which makes it clearer for everyone. Next one. So, what are the major changes in the document? The big one probably is that we're looking for a baseline of multi-engine helicopters for offshore operations designed to Amendment 45, which is a 1999 design standard. So it's hardly the latest, but it is certainly a big step up on the fact that we haven't had a minimum design standard or certification standard in there before. And twin pilot IFR. So that is the baseline. There have been many studies undertaken there. Most people are already operating to some of those standards anyway, but important that we drew the line at this point. On safety management, we've looked to streamline how the requirements are written. We previously in 590 simplified the way in which safety management and risk management in particular can be managed. With the 690, we've looked particularly to adapt the language to align with ICAO. The reason for doing that is because everybody has regulatory requirements. Most of those regulatory requirements are now based on the latest ICAO version of SMS, and therefore if the oil and gas industry guidance, even though it goes above and beyond some of the regulatory requirements in some places, if it's aligned in terms of its language and its order with the ICAO and the regulatory, then hopefully that'll make it simpler for you to demonstrate that compliance and not cut across anything that might be asked of you of the local regulators. In the training side, there's been a revised training requirements in there, a change of focus really, and this is again looking to the future. In the past, for experience levels and competence, we relied very much on some very blunt experienced hours, 3,000 hours for a captain, 1,500 for a co-pilot. We're looking now to make the emphasis more on competency-based programs with a view to the evidence-based training type work that Tim and the Heli Offshore Group have been working on for some time, eventually rolling out, and then we can move further towards that. But the other big one that's going in there is moving away from what was previously simulator training only every 24 months, which is positively pathological with a modern complex aircraft, and going towards what is wider industry best practice of simulator training every 6 months. Next one. Another thing to point out on this is that with areas like stabilized approach, HFDM and HUMS, what we're doing now is aligning much more closely with the heli offshore recommended practices. So what you will find is the headline requirements for things like stabilized approach. And that's one area where there's probably still some work to do in the future. But flight path management, HFDM, HUMS, headline requirements will be in 690. They will then be reflected in the heli offshore recommended practices or repeated in there, but then you will have that much broader guidance developed by you guys as the operators and as the subject matter experts, so that those two will line up much more closely going forward. There's been a change in some of the requirements for equipment in terms of enhancing, reflecting really what's happened in the intervening periods between 590 and 690. So things like HTORs, ACAS2, cameras, CAT ABS, and in-flight data transfer. And I'd say at this stage that it's not intended that what we have now will be the end. This document is going to continue to evolve as new designs come in and as manufacturers come up with better technology which add more safety performance or more operational performance, then we'll look to reflect those as well. But these are the ones at the moment that the work group and the community has agreed we can form as the baseline of the requirement. Next one, please. So that's not all of the changes that are in 690, but I think everybody's had a chance to look at it themselves now. Those are really the headline changes that we have in there. In terms of implementation and member alignment, this is obviously going to be the key element. It's all very well getting it written into a document. What we now need is everybody following that and implementing it and getting rewarded for doing so. So from the IOGP side, we've developed a gap assessment tool with which to further encourage the implementation. And the intention is that all the IOGP members will be conducting that gap assessment within the first 6 months, and then we'll be looking at registering differences. There's an acknowledgement that not everybody is going to implement everything or be able to implement everything immediately. And in some instances, there may be regulatory reasons attached to local regulations or particular reasons within that operating area why you cannot implement a certain requirement. And so we're looking for a registering of the differences so that we can have open conversations about those, mitigate them where we can, learn from them maybe, if it's a very valid reason why a particular requirement can't be put in place. And then use that tool to identify the gaps and have the conversations. Members are then going to produce their own implementation plans, and with that we would expect discussions internally to make sure they're reflected within the contracts. The intention is that the requirements in 690 will be implemented as soon as practicable, but certainly by the next contract or tender, or for any new contracts and tenders coming out once we've gone through publication, then again an expectation that the requirements of 690 will be reflected in that. In some instances, it's acknowledged that there may be significant investments in there, and that depends on what stage or what level that particular operator or that particular customer might be at the time. And there's also an acknowledgement that that's going to require discussions with procurement organisations, supply chain within that member company. And by having those differences registered and having that out in the open, hopefully we can provide support centrally from IOGP to assist in those conversations, and also the awareness from yourselves as the operators as well will help with those conversations as well. But there are going to be other requirements in 690 that don't require a significant investment and that are more procedural and can maybe be picked up that much quicker. And then just finally on that, the other point to say is that the member companies are still going to be responsible for their own safety assurance requirements. So that's a very brief run through, and the intention here is obviously to leave as much time as possible for answering your questions and to raising any issues that you might have. Before going over to that though, just want to hand over to Tim and ask him perhaps to have a few comments on the information that we've passed over so far.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Tony, for the introduction, and thanks for this very collaborative presentation this morning, this afternoon. It's on such a very important subject, the idea of achieving a goal of simplified safety standards And then an industry-wide alignment and adoption of those standards is, of course, a shared goal for all of us. And as Tony's mentioned, implementation around this is key. Heli Offshore, I think, is very much aligned with the IOGP process that Tony outlined on your last slide there, Tony. I think you talked about a gap analysis tool and development of an implementation plan. Heli Offshore is very focused on developing something similar. We're doing that as we roll out updates to the recommended practices, 3 of which are referenced within the IOGP R690 and are just about to be published. So something should come out soon. And we're very keen to assist our members in being able to identify and baseline where they are today and roll out what is their implementation plan for the future. So where are they going to be in the short, medium and longer term? And by doing that and providing some transparency around the challenges that are met either at a fleet level, a regional level or a regulatory level, we're able to come back, have that conversation about what it is we all do together to work towards that full implementation solution that you talked about in the long or medium to long term. So very much aligned in terms of the process of achieving the adoption across the industry. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you very much, Tony and Tim. Much to absorb there. And thank you again to the members who have submitted questions in advance. And we're going to dive straight in. We're going to cut to the chase. The first question we had from Tim Glasspool, who emailed in earlier this morning, is about funding. Who pays to implement the 690 recommendations? His question is there recognition of the additional cost of a number of the new requirements, particularly aircraft equipment? Another member emailed in, while operators retain responsibility for adopting best practice, how will implementation for tech upgrades be supported by those contracting services? So Tony, could I come to you first, please?
Yeah, and clearly especially in the current environment, who's going to pay for it is a key question. And it's, if we're looking for upgrades of standards, then they have to be paid for, and the contract is central to that. So there's twin responsibilities there. There's the responsibility initially for the oil company to make sure that the requirements are all incorporated within the contract and the tender documents. And then there's the responsibility for the operator to make sure that their bids reflect the true costs of those requirements within that, and any change management that might be involved to bring them up to those standards. I think within that there's a responsibility for us as the technical authorities within the oil and gas companies to make sure that we do have the conversations with our supply chain and procurement guys to make sure they understand the why. And an example of that is H-Tours, something we've been working towards for many years. And Gretchen and I were working at the beginning of this year on putting together a business case and a safety case that would articulate that and be something that we can take through to supply chains. We're just waiting at the moment on the final figures from Leonardo, for instance, on that one. So yeah, contracts are essential, openness, clarity from both sides, and having a good argument and understanding the why we're asking for these things. Tim?
Yeah, certainly. I would just underline the point you made, which is incorporating these requirements into contracts is going to be key. We talked about, the aim of these being in place by next contract renewal. There's an opportunity, I guess, also in the contract review cycle to have a look at, where are we mid-contract? Is there an opportunity to revise against the standard, and then start to work towards implementation of some, if not all of the requirements ahead of that ultimate renewal cycle.
Okay.
Thank you. Moving on. Tony, you mentioned in your presentation around timing of implementation. There's a question here from one of our members. Given the oil price downturn, again, you mentioned that, which recommendations some of the recommendations might take longer to implement. So with the limited resources, should some recommendations be prioritised over others? Can I ask for your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess it depends what those gaps are. Everybody's going to be at a slightly different stage to each other as to what they have implemented, what they don't. And the longer term ones may take more investment, may take longer to get in there, but they might also have a very big safety benefit. So difficult to say which ones are in there. We've highlighted some of the major changes because we believe they are going to have the major impact on safety because of the various elements that are built into those. Just really to reiterate, we're looking for changes as soon as practicable, but that's got to be a conversation between the operators and the customers as to how long that's going to take. I think important to note, and it's something when we come into the implementation and the communication of 690 to all the other stakeholder groups, certainly the oil and gas ones, we've got to explain very clearly that what we're doing with this is we're identifying what is already industry best practice. This is what we've got to achieve to be as safe as you have all agreed, and it's been signed up by all the oil and gas companies. This is what you need to do if you want that level of assurance for safety. So that's where you need to be aiming. How you get there is going to be a route that you might have to go on individually as a company, but we're going to be putting as much support and pressure as we can to make sure everybody gets there as soon as practical.
Thank you. Tim, is there anything you'd like to add?
I think absolutely. I think the idea of limited resource obviously is a key one we ought to talk about openly. I'm totally aligned with Tony. We mustn't take our eyes off the prize, which is getting to full implementation as soon as we practically can. If there is a decision to be made about limited resource and how you deploy them, I would keep coming back to what are the central safety priorities that we've identified. So on the flight operations side, avoidance of CFIT, avoidance of loss of control, we've highlighted through the safety model as being two of the key issues. On the technical side, anything we're doing to prevent single point failures in systems. So as long as everything we are able to do is geared around developing the tools, training, techniques, technology in those priority areas, then that's at least a good target to achieve. I'd like to bring Francois in if I can, Lou, because I know he has a slightly additional perspective on this in terms of resource.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. It's a good question, and I'll come back to really what is the objective of everything that we're doing around 690, how the IOGP is trying to reference our documentation in terms of recommended practices. And I know there's a lot of anxiety with everybody around resource and cost of things, given the current climate. Is this the right time to be going out and spending money on these sorts of things? I would argue that this is the exact time that we need to be getting together to do this in terms of collaboration, in terms of greater standardization across the board, because what it will do is it's going to enhance safety in an increasingly challenging market conditions and challenging environment. It enhances the collaboration and it raises the bar, but it also will create efficiencies across the board. So yes, there will be some capital outlay initially, I suspect, for some of the initiatives and some of the technologies, but hopefully offset by adoption of a greater standardization. So I'll come back to Tony's initial point. All right, now it's our turn to get this implemented. These guys have worked hard to develop this. It's about implementation across the board, both from the operators and the oil companies. So I see that as the crucial enabler to the success of this is that implementation. And that way it will mean that a helicopter operator is not being asked to do the same thing 10 different ways. It's being asked to do that same thing the same way by everybody. And that's going to bring efficiencies into this while we still enhance safety, while we still take that step forward. So I certainly don't want to underestimate the power of the implementation and the power of this collaboration, this step forward.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. I'm going to go to Matt now, who's been gathering questions from the Q&A icon. Remember, please do submit your comments or your questions through the Q&A icon. Matt, what's coming through from members online?
So there's a question here, Lou, that I think probably talks to the aims of the 690. It talks specifically about 690 Section 2 and talks about the VFR minimum and operating heights as shown in a table. Is this now aligned with all IOGP customers, or will we still see customer-specific operational procedures? Today, we have different customer operational differences in weather, shuttle heights, ARA, minima, etc., that the crew have to balance and jump between. Is there any ambition to align these and align them further?
Yeah, and I think the answer to that, Matt, is there absolutely an ambition to align them. That's what we're trying to do on this, because they may not have been well defined previously. We've certainly, everybody that's gone through the ASC has signed up to these, and that process of going through and doing the gap analysis and then registering the differences will hopefully illustrate if there are any outliers in there, and if there are, then we can have the conversations to find out why. But that's a great example of the sort of alignment that we absolutely are aiming to achieve with this.
Absolutely, and a great question. And again, coming back to what are our guiding lights, anything that points to a simplification and a removal of any complexities for the guys on the front line, whether they're in the cockpit, whether in the hangar, whether they're managing ground operations, anything that removes additional complexity or complication has got to be a very positive thing for us in terms of racing safety standards.
Great, thanks very much. Gilles Brugnot sent in a question from Airbus Helicopters, talking about whether or not there was an opportunity within 690 to highlight desirable safety features looking forward, such as the recovery function with a 4-axis autopilot, vortex warning on the PFD, proactive service around hums from the OEMs. And I guess enhanced H-tours might fall into that category as well. Can you just say a few words about that for us, please?
Yeah, and I think the thing to point out here is that the current 690 isn't going to be it forever. It's going to evolve, and as the OEMs, as operators develop new bits of equipment that we believe has safety benefit, then we can look at bringing those in. We've already got a fair bit in there, so things like H-tours, the wording we've used around that, around some of the the in-flight download, we want it in there when it's available for the aircraft type. So that will hopefully incentivize the OEMs to produce this and get this to market, which will hopefully give their aircraft a leg up in terms of being more compliant with the standard. But what we have at the moment is the areas we could get agreement of and that were mature at the time of writing. We're probably looking at going into a 2-year review cycle on 690. That's an ambition. We need to improve on our current rate of getting documents out there, but that's certainly the intent. And so if there are, certainly focusing on the equipment side of it, if there are significant developments that have got to a point where we believe we can put them in the guidance and the standards, then absolutely intend to do so.
Tony, just a clarification on that point. I imagine you'd never want 690 to be so prescriptive that it's pointing towards particular systems, particular types of equipment. It's really about that high level objective as you've written the rest of the document. What's the safety objective we're trying to achieve here? And then allowing our OEMs who play such an important role in this to innovate, to find those technical solutions that meet those safety objectives. It's the alignment of the safety objective, not necessarily the solution that the document will always point towards. That's a correct interpretation.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, we've tried to do that right across the board. There are some areas where we're probably prescriptive based on experience, where there needs to be more detail, but generally speaking, we're looking to achieve an outcome, and how the operators or the OEMs achieve that is really up to them. So it's trying to be outcome performance based.
And could I just jump in and add as well? You know, a good example of that is AFCON, for example. So 690 has written some sort of guiding or high-level overview around flight path management. Then we have the 690 referring to the recommended practices, which now gives slightly more detailed guiding principles. And then that refers to the AFCON, which is designed by the OEMs to be very type specific and drills down into the technical details. So there's a nice layer here or path to achieving those outcomes. I think this has been a good way of achieving that.
Thank you. Thank you. Tony, you actually answered, both Tim and Tony, you answered a question that had already come in around alternative means of compliance, and also about the review cycles. So thanks for preempting that. That was excellent. We have a very specific question here from Natapat from Thai Aviation Services. who said, due to this sort of limited simulator provision, there are concerns about the training requirements every 6 months, that they may impact on operations and company cost. And I wondered if I could seek a comment from you, Tony, on this matter.
Yeah, it's a good example of where we've got a requirement which we believe is going to deliver safety value and is required, that is possibly not possible to deliver in certain regions, or is difficult to deliver. Are we then going to lower the bar back down to the 24 months? Absolutely not. 6-month simulator training, for all the reasons that most people know about, is where we want to get to. That is what we're going to set as the bar that we want to aim for. And then it's going to be a case of how do we get there? Some people can already achieve it. For others, it's going to be a more difficult ask. But having the bar set up there incentivizes OEMs, simulator training providers, to make sure that the facilities are available. Where there's additional cost involved for an operator to achieve that, then that's got to be part of the contract conversation with the customer. The customer should be putting that in there. And then how they achieve that, they need to work out. But that's a good example of why we're setting the bar, or where we've set a bar, and we don't want to come back from that, because we believe that is actually critical to achieving the safety performance that we want.
I agree. I think it's a great example, Lou, of perhaps got the finger on an issue which is, very specific to perhaps that region. The implementation process that Tony outlined and Heli Offshore was really keen to put in place for the operator side should uncover where there are either fleet-based, or in this case, probably regional-based issues. And it's having the framework in place just allows us to have that open conversation around, right, here's the issue, here's the challenge. Let's have the safety conversation around how we're going to achieve the outcome. What is it we're going to do? And so surfacing the conversations around those challenges is a really important output of having this framework built in.
Can I ask how people get involved in that safety conversation, beyond today's discussion? How should people contribute to that discussion?
So certainly, Heli Offshore structure is set up so that we have a number of groups where the idea is that we're bringing in the right people to have the right discussions around what we see as the key safety issues and what's going to be our strategic move going forward. So Heli Offshore's safety strategy panel, the SSP, of which many people on the call today will have either been part of or attended at some point, is a key vehicle for that. It's a key place where we can all get together as multiple stakeholder communities can pull that information in, have good, safe, open safety conversations, discussion about what our priorities are going to be, and then that feeds very much into some outputs. And Francois, do you want to talk about the part that the working groups play in?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So that's a good point and a good question, Lou, about having conversations. What practically does that look like to everybody? Heli Offshore spent the last 5 or 6 years developing a structure and governance process to be as inclusive as possible. So you've heard me say this a million times. We're all Heli Offshore. So we have a strategic structure which is kind of led by the SSP to have those strategic directional conversations, right? Which then feeds back into the work streams and then the more granular detail of the how with the work groups that actually will deliver at the end of the day. So we've structured it that way. And what we've done is that in the majority of the work streams or work groups, we actually have all stakeholders, as many of the stakeholders across the board sitting in those groups to have those open conversations in a safe environment where there's no judgment and there's no competitive issues. That's why we structured it that way. So Lou, and of course we have the collaboration tool in the Heli Offshore space to facilitate that. So that's what we've been building over the last 5 years to develop that safe environment to have those open and honest conversations, which in my time in Heli Offshore, I've seen the benefits of that. And our very call today is a direct example as a result of what we've been doing, having these conversations all the way to now.
Thank you.
Can I just say that there's also the groups like HSAC, Oil and Gas UK, etc., other groups that we collaborate with and that collaborate with operators, oil and gas companies locally. They can be used to have those same conversations. It's not just Heli Offshore and IOGP.
Yep.
Yeah, very fair point.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Matt, back to members online. What questions do we have coming through?
Sure. There's one here from Nasri Marzouk, who was asking about: is there any potential for robust EBT implementation replacing legacy training?
I know to Tim on that as the world expert, but yeah, as I mentioned a moment ago, that's the direction we want to go to. So more competency based, less based on hours, and something the good operators are already doing, but we want to make that the normal. So yes, from my point of view, from an IOGP point of view, Tim.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tony. So the answer to Naji's question is absolutely. We want training programs supported by a regulation that is underpinned by evidence on what are the key things that we need to be training our crews towards, what are the issues that we see. And the key element of evidence-based training, of course, is that it's a competency-based training program. So as Tony says, you know, we're focused now on developing, enhancing and supporting competencies. And those are the technical and the non-technical skills that our crews have. The current approach is to do that through EASA, which has opened up a regulatory framework. The fixed wing community went ahead. They've been developing things over the last decade or so. We're a little bit astern of them. The new regulation should appear through EASA in the early part of next calendar year. And we intend to be, if not alongside them, just in very short trail behind the fixed wing community in having a data report, and then developing a baseline training program, which will be adoptable at that point by members who want to take it on. But a point to make here, I think, is that we don't need to wait for that regulation. We can already start to get our arms around, get familiar with, and incorporate the idea of competency-based training assessment programs into our current training program. There's no penalty for doing that. There's no barrier to doing that. So strongly encourage everybody to start to get their arms around that and work towards implementation under a legal framework when that becomes possible. And I know, Tony, from your perspective, I know the 690 would, you know, ideally you'd like to have this more perhaps directly referenced, but until that regulation's in place, that's a challenge to
yeah, so we've changed the focus slightly to put more emphasis. We previously had competency-based training in there to an extent. There's greater emphasis in 690, but it's really got to wait until the evidence-based training becomes more regulatory approved. But then we'll jump at it and we'll be going down that route.
Okay, thanks. We've got a question from Patrick Bosman saying, Heli Offshore is developing a master minimum helideck equipment list as part of their helideck working group, which outlines equipment serviceability requirements for helideck owners and operators. As Report 690 is focused on contractual requirements between IGP members and helicopter operators, would there be a way to reference this MMHEL in Report 690 or a future revision to try and align safety, responsibility and reciprocity?
Yeah, I think in future, as we've done at the moment with a lot of the Heli Offshore documents, we want to have them aligned, cross-referenced and supported between the two of them. The MEL, Helideck MEL one's a great initiative. I've seen some of the draft documents coming out of that. A lot of good stuff in there. Interestingly, we're having a conversation about that within the ASC leadership team tomorrow. Because it's related to helidecks, and helidecks are all owned and operated by the oil and gas companies, those have got to be requirements that are understood, agreed, and supported by the oil and gas companies. So it's absolutely an area where we need to get involved, where we need to prep our operations people for that, so they can understand it and pick it up. So it's another area where we're going to have to collaborate to make a success of it. Great idea, good content, and if we can get that support and agreement right across the piece, then yeah, absolutely no reason why future versions can't be referencing that as well.
Grant, did you raise your hand? Oh, okay. Back to Matt.
Waving, not drowning, eh, Grant? Okay. We've got a specific question here from Stu Stavely on HFDM. There's a line in the 690 that says that HFDM event thresholds are implemented based on flight manual limitations, flight profiles, and SOPs. And his question was, please confirm the intention here is that FDM thresholds are driven from risk and point to the published parameters controlling that risk. I don't know if anyone would like to comment on that.
Yeah, well, they're absolutely should be driven by risk, but they absolutely shouldn't only be based on flight manual parameters and the rest of it. Certain thresholds, yeah, you typically might have 2 or 3 thresholds for a particular event within FDM. One of those is going to be set at your flight manual limit or your SOP limits, but others are either going to be set as early warners or to improve the operational performance. And I think things like stabilized approach. I can give you an example with our corporate fleet, looking at long landings. We've got a baseline requirement where we set those. Then we thought we can do this a lot better, so we bring the thresholds in, and we end up with the fleet pilots being consistently able to land it on a postage stamp right where they need to, because it's the aim small, miss small type concept. So FDM, yep, the baseline requirements, if you like, are going to be based on flight manual or SOP limitations, but the really good operators use it in a far more advanced way than that, tied in very closely to training departments, operation departments, to really achieve operational excellence and use it as a tool that's feedback to the crews. But Tim, your side on that?
Absolutely, Tony. Yeah, thank you. And I think there's a lot as an industry we can do and develop and look at. And I'll come back to Matt in a second just for a sort of outline of where the latest version of the HFDM recommended practices goes to. But certainly there's the sort of compliance aspect, and yes, it must be based on risk for sure. There's a lot more, as we've discussed in the past, about rather than looking at data just on a flight-by-flight basis that has its use, but how can we look at data collectively? How can we look from a risk management perspective and see things happening before they've actually happened, rather than waiting for an event? So there's some good discussion, and I think, Matt, the RP leaves the door open for that to be developed in the future. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. It's compliance. The staying inside the box is certainly the starting point with FDM, but I agree entirely that we can do so much more. Looking at distributions, looking at how all of your flights are performing is really important. There's a huge amount we can do there, and the RP it encourages that at the moment, and we're going to do more with it in the future.
Yeah, just Grant Campbell here, just echoing what Matt was saying. When we reviewed the RP, as Tony said, the requirements in 690 are at a very high level. The RP has the detail in it, and the detail, the RP reverts very much to risk of an incident, rather than just ticking a box to say you've exceeded something. What was the risk associated with that exceedance? So it's very much a risk-based approach we're looking at.
Absolutely. There's a question here about the 690 talks about the simplified safety management system. Could you talk a little bit about what that looks like and how it might and how operators might achieve a simplified SMS?
Yeah, I think the baseline for the SMS hasn't changed a huge amount from 590, and in that one there were some diagrams and the rest of it that were dropped out on this one. The safety management system requirements are still based on ICAO, which forms the basis of the various regulatory requirements, and then it has some additional elements that we've added in there through experience and which we believe add value. So I'd say simplified. It's aligned. We're trying to simplify the understanding of the requirements and try and take away what has been one of the challenges for a number of the operators, is that they're asked a different set of questions or in a different way by their regulator when they're audited than they are from their oil and gas customer. And so in trying to align the wording and the order in which they're looked at, hopefully that'll remove a bit of that complexity. I would say in there, though, that the one area that we have added in is around safety leadership, because again, we're talking about best practice. And what we see out there with the very best operators is they have a strong focus on a number of those human factors, safety leadership related elements. And we've built that into the 690 as well, because it works. It's not just in aviation. Those are generic safety leadership sort of competencies and actions that we want to see and which have proved effective across many industries. So hopefully that answers that question. But happy to take a more detailed question on that offline if whoever else wants it.
Yeah, just back in what. Sorry,
Grant, you go.
Yeah, just back on what Tony said there. The simplification is going from 590 to 690 is a reduction in about 3/4 of the words. The requirements now are, or the specification is much clearer now and is aligned with the wording in a lot of the areas in the ICAO, SMM or Annex. So as Tony said, demonstrating compliance should be a lot easier. There's a lot less variance in it because we've tried to look at it much more aligned with the regulatory part, apart from areas like LOSA and safety leadership where we've actually raised the bar a little bit.
I was going to add to that, Grant and Tony, that the SMS maturity has been, a little bit not inconsistent, but it's been variable. Different regions under different regulatory environments, even under different parts of operations. There's a very specific focus on flight operations. It's developing now in maintenance. It's how everything's slowly becoming aligned. So the idea that we're coming back to a framework that's based on ICAO, which will now be the core framework for the regulators, is a great thing. One point I'd like to make is I hope as an industry we're shooting for not just compliance around safety management and a greater alignment around the tools itself or themselves, but are we able to measure the effectiveness of our safety management system? How much of what we are doing on a daily, weekly and monthly basis is actually having a safety management impact, so it's improving our risk picture? And that's something I think as an industry, that's a conversation I really look forward to having and developing.
I think it's a great one because I think, as Grant said, there's been a lot of wording taken out, perhaps to take away some of the confusion, but also take away some of the requirements that were in there that weren't adding value. So what we have in there at the moment is what we believe does add value and has been proven to add value. But as Tim said, it's going to be an evolution. There are improvements that we can do in that, and within different cultures, within different regions, there are probably variances in the way in which they apply those as well that need to be brought out.
Great, thank you. A couple of quite specific questions here from Arnaud Roux of Airbus Helicopters asking, except when it's required by ATC, would you want to consider replacing HF requirements in tenders by satellite tracking and communication? And coupled with that, do you still consider the ADF mandatory for offshore operations?
I'll hand over to Grant in a second, but to say that generally on the equipment fit, whereas in previous times we've listed virtually every component on the aircraft, which is absolutely bog standard, we've tried now to keep 690 focused on the additional equipment that adds safety value. But Grant, do you want to comment on the specifics of that question?
Yes, what we did with this, we looked at what we put in 690 is we looked at an appropriately equipped IFR aircraft. Now, if the regulator requires an ADF and an HF, yes, fit it. If it allows to be replaced by satellite comms, we'd very much welcome that. That reduces a huge amount of maintenance because HF systems are notoriously unreliable. So we will be guided to an extent by the regulator. ADF's a great question. There's a lot of push to take these off our platforms. They don't appear to add value, but some regulators see great value in them because they're a very cheap, easy to use tool. But yes, satellite flight satellite communication instead of HF, great idea.
Tim, any thoughts on that?
I think at the end of the day, there's some regulatory requirements which underpin, the equipment that's on the aircraft. So there'll be standards that sit in, a National Aviation Authority's requirement just to be able to perform commercial air transport in a specific environment. So of course we'll be guided by those. And the OEMs, of course, when they're building and creating the type certificate and equipment list for an aircraft, we'll be going back to what's currently required at the time. So it's just understanding the process. If we move on, how do we, as an industry, look at the removal of certain pieces of equipment if we deem them to be obsolete? But yes, it's a great open question to have, and we ought to be doing that
openly. I guess that's one that sort of sits to some of the collaboration and the discussions we can have. If you guys as OEMs feel that there's equipment there that you deem as unnecessary, which is adding additional weight, complexity, cost to the aircraft without value, that's something we as an industry body, Heli Offshore, stroke IOGP, can then talk to the regulators about, and it may just be something that they've lost sight of. Yeah, we as a collective industry body ought to have a say on some of that, just to make sure it's the baseline requirements are sensible.
Tony, if I can add some stuff here, just on not particular to the equipment, but satellite-based flight following. Just as a reminder that we have the ADS-B project ongoing in the North Sea. The trial has started. Obviously, in the Gulf of Mexico, they've had it for a little while now, but we've started the trial in the North Sea, and we had one of the last installation masts. I forget the location of it now, but north of Aberdeen, we've got about 4 or 5 masts now up and running, and that trial has kicked off nicely, and the feedback we're getting is very positive, and it's going to host a whole lot of activities from weather to the reduction of wrong deck landings and in-flight following, and traffic separation. So hopefully there's some good news coming out of that, and that'll certainly end up making ADFs redundant, I suspect.
Matt, if we could come back for one last of the sort of very technical questions, then I'm going to ask each of the panelists for a concluding thought before asking Tim and Tony to close the session. So Matt, if we could have one last technical question from the floor, please. Okay,
sure. We've had a couple of questions in around the requirements for HUM's in-flight data transfer. Some concerns around the cost and the effectiveness, given that there are multiple systems available, and also the effect it may have on out of service aircraft if the system is out of service, is the aircraft out of service, and so on. So perhaps if you could explain some of the thinking around that, it would be helpful.
Yeah, I think the baseline for that, if we look at a lot of the requirements and the leaps in safety we've achieved over the last 20 years, a lot of it has been copying what's gone on in commercial fixed wing and some of the areas there. And I think this is a classic case where we now have complex aircraft that are generating a lot of information, which is a benefit for maintenance, airworthiness, reliability. And why would you not want the same sort of capability that the airlines have of getting that information off the aircraft in a quicker and a better way? And so that's why, for a whole bunch of reasons, HUM's being a relatively easy one and a quick one where there is already some capability, having that capability in there is something we see as adding benefit, both for the offer that it has at the moment in terms of being able to get that information off more effectively, but also opening up capability for the development of other tools, other processes that are going to add value in the future. So it's in there both as something that we want to see as a capability on our current aircraft or the aircraft we bring in, but also again as an incentive for the manufacturers to make sure we develop those. I think, Grant, you had some good points on the HUMS one in particular.
Yes, so if we go back to the very early days with HUMS, this was an aspiration that how do we get the data off the aircraft? At the moment, we use very, very old technology, cards, sticks, all sorts of USB transfer devices, and these are prone to failure. And if we use HUMS, a wireless HUM system or a wireless download, that takes a person out the loop. And if as a minimum, we'll get 100% data, and that'll increase safety. There is numerous other ways, as Tony said, we can use this. The fixed wing use it all the time. We can save time in turnarounds, we save manpower in turnarounds. And as I said, the big win is getting an easy win to get good data and reliable data to improve safety.
But it's not to say it's not without challenges. So the processes, the procedures around doing that have got to be worked out. And that's why, again, another work group within Heli Offshore that we're all involved in to make sure we can deliver that in the most effective possible way.
Exactly.
It's a great recognition of that point, Tony, because I think we're all aspiring towards, raising the safety bar, getting the latest technology, and even asking for innovative solutions that we haven't yet thought of to improve in the future. it's just the framework provides us with the opportunity to have that conversation. Some people are not, all in the same place, haven't got necessarily the same view or same level of understanding. Let's get that. Let's have the conversation. Most principally, of course, it applies everywhere. By introducing something new, we want to make sure we're not creating some unintended consequences. Naturally, that's a process we all understand. But Francois, I think there's some work that's been done around this particular topic in answer to whoever raised the question. That's been done within the TSG. Is that correct?
There has indeed, Tim, and it really goes to a little bit of confusion around this topic initially at the outset because it was termed real-time hums. And because we used the word hums, I think Grant with the 690 group kind of went back and revisited the wording because they were conflating hums with actually data download and transfer. And those two are intrinsically different because it just happened to use the hum system to do a data download, and that data could be FDM data, for example. So we needed to understand that as a community. And so that went back to the TSG. The TSG, the technical steering group, then commissioned a paper that was drafted up, a survey followed by a paper. And it wasn't specifically looking just at data download. It was also looking at hums and are there alternative solutions to hums as well. So just separating those two out was an important thing because people were getting all wrapped around the axle going, well, real-time hums was never designed for that. And it's trying to understand hums and the analysis of it. So I think that paper has started to clarify what it is we're chasing with that group. And I think what Grant and Tony are talking about here is the advantages of real-time data download, which could potentially, and certainly in areas, enhance safety rather than just hums. So we're working on both those subjects.
Thank you very much. Matt, may I ask you to sort of summarise the questions and comments so far this afternoon?
Sure, I think they probably fall into two categories, Lou, which is in general that our members, as I read it, welcome the ambition, they welcome the aspiration, they welcome the aim to raise the bar, and they welcome the standardization, the possibility to fly in the same way for all their customers is a huge prize for them, as far as from what I understand. There are concerns over the implementation and specifically the costs, obviously, and that's entirely understandable in the state we find the industry in. And of course, they're keen to engage on the specific details to understand what the aim is and what the impact is going to be. I think it's fair to say they see the potential, but look forward to being able to give feedback and to get involved in discussion with their customers and take it forward and see how this can actually be implemented in practice to make progress on the safety goals, raise the bar and raise standardization.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd now like to go to each panel member just really for a closing thought. If you're watching this and you haven't had the chance to get an answer to your question, don't fear, this is just the beginning. We will circulate a document with all the Q&As. So some of the questions we touched on in this morning's session around night deck landing practice and multi-engine, multi-pilot helicopters, for example, we'll create one document with all of these questions in, so you won't miss any of the information that was shared this morning, and vice versa. So we'll share the questions we got to this morning with all members. But if I could just ask for closing thoughts right now. Olaf, can we come to you first, please?
Thank you very much, Lou. I've been sitting here in quiet awe, just listening to the insights of the various people that have contributed so far, and also the depth of the questions that are coming in. It's not often that you have the privilege of listening to such deep insights, and especially when it's coupled with a very clear sense of strategic direction, passion to improve, and willingness to work together. That gives me a lot of confidence in 690 and in aviation safety overall. Now, I had a couple of points I wanted to make, and first, it's about the why. So at IOGP, we probably have the most extensive data set on safety and fatalities in our industry. And it is showing good improvements over many years. But as Tony alluded to, our Project Zafira also says, well, we're still not at zero. And every fatality is a failure from us. Also, if we have a helicopter incident, all our improvements over those years will actually be wiped out, or partially wiped out. So that's our why. Our how, as IOGP, we believe in standardization. We believe in global standardization. It should not be the case that it is riskier to enter a helicopter in one area of the world than it is in another. We should be globally harmonized, which is why we believe in this. And also, we should not base it on the lowest common denominator. We should raise the bar. And if anyone receives this 690 and says, well, you know, we're way beyond this already, then we haven't gone far enough and we haven't set the bar high enough, in my view. And the third point I would like to mention, and that's about the what. So it makes a difference from this call if the people that have participated and listened in, if you go away with an intent to say, hey, you know, this seems like interesting stuff, this is good stuff, let's see how we can make it work and how we can implement quickly, rather than going away thinking, well, you know, we'll see this some other day and some other month. We're keen. I mean, we're now at a stage in this project where the contractable standard 690 will be issued very shortly. Yeah. And then the difference we can make is acceleration of the implementation. And I think there we all have a role to play. We will certainly be communicating on it, but it also helps if people on this call, you know, help pull the load and contribute positively. But thank you very much. It's been absolutely amazing to listen. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Can I come to you, Grant, next?
It's been a great pleasure working on this. What's got me, and it's been highlighted all the way through this, is the collaboration between Heli Offshore, IOGP, and all the operators. In the past, there was always tensions between everyone, and some of the examples of using the RPs that we've gone to. In the past, we'd sometimes put words in the IOGP standards that qualified the RPs. Now we're referring to them directly. And I really would like to thank the work groups for that, for coming up with some excellent documents.
Thank you very much. Alan.
Yeah, so I think from my point of view, we've created a great document. We've talked about implementation. I think for me, it's all about the purpose, which is, you know, we talk about fatalities, but each one of them is a person with a family, everything that goes with it. My own son works in the oil industry. I found myself wanting him to be with a specific company and fly the specific helicopters. What we're trying to do here is make that the standard for everybody. So I think that's the only thing I want people to keep in mind.
Thank you very much. Francois.
Yeah, thanks, Lou. A great session, another great session today. So thanks to all of you guys for joining and contributing. We really appreciate your questions because it helps the conversation. And as Tim alluded to, let's keep having these conversations, right? We've built the structure to do it. We've now come together to do it. And as everybody has said, what is the purpose of all of this? The purpose is zero fatalities. We all want the same thing. So I certainly see this as a way, this collaboration, all the work that's gone into 690, all the work that's gone into our recommended practices, is a way that we can act, that we recognize that we can't do this individually, but we could do this together. We could do it more effectively together. We could be safer together. We can enhance our industry together, even during a crisis. And I think that's been evident, certainly since March, when COVID-19 struck us all. We've continued to deliver on a lot of these things. So the impetus and the drive is still there, which I'm excited to see. Key factors and key enablers. Implementation. You've heard Tony say it. You've heard Olaf say it. Implementation is going to be the key enabler to check that, one, this is working. Two, we can measure that it's working. And then, as we've also said, this is an iterative step. It's not perfect out the box. People are going to be able to pick holes. They always will do. But we need that feedback so we can improve this going forward. So it's going to be a crucial thing. Implementation, when you start implementing it, we can start to test whether it's working or not. We've taken a commitment. We'll get feedback from the operators. Tony's taken a commitment. He'll get feedback from the oil companies on how it's all coming together. We can combine that and we can make it better. So I really want to stress that implementation and feedback has got to happen. Please don't shy away from that. And then, of course, the thing about collaboration, I don't want to underestimate how powerful that has been in this process. And for the first time ever, we've brought these groups together comprised of all the stakeholders to deliver on recommended practices, which then is being referenced by 690. That is a massive step forward for our industry. It's a massive step forward for saving lives and bringing everybody home safely every single day. So I'm passionate to see this through. I'm really going to be there cheering this along and driving the implementation and trying to help as many people as we can with it. So that's it. I'll get off my soapbox now. Thanks, Lou.
Thank you very much. James Adams, apologies for not introducing you right at the beginning.
No, that's okay.
A stealth member of our panel. May I ask for your closing thoughts?
Well, I think this is a great document, and it's going to be a tool that I can use that I have actually a force behind me. And what I do want to say is thank you to the leadership and all the collaboration that has gone about with all the different entities that are involved in this. And as Tony has stated, it's going to be a living document, so we can improve on that. Taking note of some of the questions answered today, it gives me some ideas on some of the areas that I can help work on going forward in 690. So thank you to everybody that was here today and appreciate the questions. And I look forward to supporting not only the oil and gas companies, but also the operators to make this a success.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And last but not least on our panel, Jeff, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'll try not to repeat a lot of what my colleagues have said I agree with, but I think the last thing I'd like to add is I'd like to make a bit of a challenge to everyone out there. I mean, we've got great participation, and that's wonderful to see. We would really like to see more people get involved. There's a lot of intelligent, thoughtful people that are on the call today, and really we want your voice to be heard. Get involved with the work groups, get involved with your heli offshore work groups, your local groups, whether it be HSAC or maybe we need to form more regional ones in parts of the world that are underrepresented. But this has been different in all my time in this business, where we've seen so much of the collaboration, and we need more input from the front line because a lot of the frontline people have great ideas and great ways for us to solve problems. And we need more of that in these times where we're dealing with fewer resources, but collectively with all the intelligence and the heads we can put together, we can solve even more and move this industry forward. So thank you. And I just want to throw that challenge out there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Perfect point to close on. Thank you, Jeff. Now I'm going to ask for closing remarks from Tony and then Tim. Thank you.
Yeah, just thanks again to Louise and Heli Offshore for hosting this one. I think from my point of view, just a closing comment, the intention here is to accelerate alignment right across the industry. And I think what we're hoping to create here is get a credible document that is credible because we all as the aviation industry have produced it and we all support it. And in that sense, I hope we can all be ambassadors of it. Jeff's idea to have this meeting today to make sure that we shared the document not only with those that have worked on it, but with all of you out on the front line as the operators. And I hope we can all be ambassadors so that when we do, this thing is published in the next couple of months, you can all pick it up and challenge your customers as to why they're not referring to it or using the standards in there. And in the same way, those of us in the oil and gas companies can be challenging our supply chains as to why they're not using it, because this is a document that's been created by the industry and by the experts across there. So intent is credible document to accelerate the alignment that we're all on.
Thanks, Teddy. And I'll come in and say I very much welcome the conversation today. Thank you so much for it. Thank you to everybody who put work into it. I absolutely believe that having this centralized framework gives us the opportunity to have those discussions around, okay, how do we move towards this both quickly and successfully, and put ourselves in a position where in 1, 3 and 5 years time as an industry, we've got something to be able to say we changed something and we got better as a result of it. And one of the goals of Heli Offshore is to manage and measure some of those safety improvements with all of our stakeholders to make sure that the very, very good work that's gone in here is actually delivering tangible and observable results. So we'll certainly take that challenge on. I think that's a part of the challenge that Jeff was giving us there. But we said thanks to the team for organising. Thanks for everyone who's done the work. I'd just like to say thanks to the membership, everybody who's on the call and joined in this afternoon to be part of this very important safety conversation. Thanks to everybody who raised a question during the session and those before. We hope this is the first of several or many safety conversations. Really important that we can have this constructive discussion all around moving towards implementation as opposed to moving away from it, and never letting go of what many have absolutely underlined here. The sole aim is elimination of accidents in the industry. So thank you very much indeed to everybody for participating.
Thank you, Tim. So yes, thank you for your attention and your contributions. As ever, let us know what you think. Email me, louise.nicholson@helioffshore.org or info@helioffshore.org, and one of the team will get back to you. We want to know what you think. But thank you. Stay safe and goodbye for now.